Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel and welcome to another episode of Movie Monday, where I sit down and I critically assess and discuss my favorite films with you guys. So for our second episode of this series, I got a request to do The Fifth Element. So I'm actually very familiar with The Fifth Element. I love this movie. I think it's so funny and so well made. So today we are going to talk about that movie, and without further ado, let's get started. So The Fifth Element was made in 1997 and it is directed by Luc Besson. It stars actors such as Milla Jovovich and Bruce Willis. So the synopsis of The Fifth Element is it's set hundreds of years in the future, and it is about this cab driver named Corbin Dallas, who is played by Bruce Willis, and this just random girl falls into his cab, and turns out this girl is not just some random girl. She is the savior of the universe, and she is the fifth element, thus the name of the movie, and she was brought back to defeat the evil that is threatening Earth. So I know it sounds not very complicated, but there is a lot going on in this movie, and that's true. There are a bunch of different storylines that all come together as one, which is something that I love about the film, because you follow multiple different characters and they all are connected and come together, and it's very conclusive in that way. So we are gonna get into my critique. I have my notes here, so if you see me like looking down a little bit, I'm looking at my iPad because I just watched the movie and took notes as I was watching it, so I'm a little bit more prepared this time. If you don't remember the criteria that I use to critique my films, they'll be here on the side, and let's get right into the story criteria. Looking over what I wrote a lot of stuff under story, so this is going to be a big topic. But one thing that I really wanted to point out was how well written this film is. Whether it's the dialogue or just the actual plot line or just pretty much anything in general, it's very well written. This movie is mostly dramatic, but it also has some very, very funny scenes in it, and it never fails to make me laugh. So that is something that I find very interesting about this movie, about how it can invoke multiple different emotions from me while I watch it, just in the short 2 hours that it is. So yeah, I really enjoy the dialogue in this movie. One critique that I do have of it is it's a little bit exposition heavy, and so when you're watching it in the beginning, you really have to pay attention to what's going on to be able to understand the rest of the movie. And that's usually fine. A lot of movies do that, but this exposition is like 15 minutes long. In the beginning, you see the whole explanation of what the fifth element is. You see the evil that's threatening Earth and what the president of New York City is going to do about it. Or not of New York City, but of the whole federated territories, that's what they're called. But you have all that, and you actually aren't introduced to the main character until 16 minutes into the film, which is not something that filmmakers do a lot nowadays. But it's not like a big deal or anything. When you going into this movie, you really have to like sit down and pay attention for the first 15 minutes, and even after that they keep introducing new characters and new things, and then you are taken along the story. You're not just like dropped into it. It builds as you watch it, which I think is really cool. So another thing under story I think this is included is the character performances by the actors in this movie are incredible. Gary Oldman plays the main antagonist in the film, and he does such an amazing job. He has so many monologues. He's just like, even though he's supposed to be such a hated character, he still has so much personality to him that you almost want to like him in a way, if that makes sense. And if you've seen the movie, you kind of know what I'm talking about, because it's just so apparent how like Gary Oldman fits into this character, and he's just an amazing actor, like on his own, by like in everything else that he does, so I don't know why I would expect anything less from this film. But there's just the way that he portrays the character is just so well done. And then Chris Tucker is also in this film, and he plays the hilarious Ruby Rhod, and it's just such a comic relief character for this film, but he also fits in such a way that just really keeps the story going. Like he's the reason that there's a contest for, like he's the main promoter of the contest that Corbin wins to go to Fhloston Paradise to get the stones. And so he seems like he doesn't really have a purpose other than comedic relief, but he's actually like, they made him the reason for there to be a discreet mission for Corbin to go on. Chris Tucker is just so like, he's just so funny in this film. I don't know what else to say about it. Like, he does an amazing job with this character, and I've watched this movie with friends even though they've never heard of it, and they just come out loving it, and mainly because of that character, because of Ruby Rhod and how funny he is, and he just really ties the whole movie together. When it comes to drama and comedy, they both just, it's very well made. I love it. Not in short, because that was not short, but in conclusion, I should say, this movie for me is really non-stop action. It's 2 hours and 5 minutes long, which is one of the kind of longer films, I guess, from the normal hour-and-a-half standard, but the entire film, you're either paying attention to what's going on, as in the exposition, and trying to figure out what's happening, and then you're following these characters and you're getting invested in them, and then there's so much action like in the last hour of the film, and it moves so quickly, and there's so much going on that it doesn't feel like a 2-hour film. I know there's movies that you just sit down and you watch and you're like, wow, this feels so much longer than it is, but this is not one of those movies. This movie packs so much action into just 2 hours, and it really feels like every minute that they made in this movie is well spent, which is something that's really rare for a lot of movies to say. So I'm giving it pretty high praise, so from the story point at least, because I think, and it's hard because I've seen the film so many times, I know the plot points and what happens in the story. I know that one of my friends, like, we had to watch the movie with subtitles because there's just so much going on and there's so much talking all the time, especially in the first like half hour of the movie, and that you really need to understand what they're saying, where it's actually easier if you watch with subtitles, and I agree, and I'm usually not even a person that likes subtitles, so if you enjoy subtitles, then watch this movie with it, because I think it helps, actually. It doesn't take away from the film at all. So I am gonna give the story a 9 out of 10, because I really can't find any points in the movie where I was confused about what's going on, because they explain it. Some scenes that kind of explain like a little bit too much, like there's a little bit of spoon feeding in the beginning, but I think when you are trying to make a movie that is so futuristic in nature, and there's such a story that doesn't go on in everyday life, you have to spend the time explaining what's going on, what's happening, what the conflict is before you can get into the action. So overall story for me gets a 9 out of 10. And I have some fun facts about this movie that I don't know why I know them. I've probably watched behind the scenes about this movie, so that's probably where I found them, but there's a scene in the beginning when you are introduced to the priest in the movie, Vito Cornelius, who is like the main, he is the contact for Leeloo when she's on Earth. And you're introduced to him, and the president says the line, "You have 20 seconds to like explain the situation." And he speaks for exactly 20 seconds after he says that. So I think that's a really cool tidbit. Another thing is the secret language in the film, it's like the ancient language that Leeloo speaks and the priests speak. The director, Luc Besson, actually made that language into something that only he and Mia Jovovich knew how to speak. And I actually heard a story that sometimes people on the cast and crew would get a little frustrated because they'd be speaking and practicing this language that she had to know so well for the movie, and other people wouldn't know what she was saying. And so I thought that was really interesting that he actually made a fake language for her to speak in the movie, and so it seemed like really genuine, and I think that's really cool. Another interesting tidbit about this movie that's really uncommon is that the main character, Corbin, and the main antagonist, Zorg, never meet each other. Not once in the movie do they see each other or know who each other are. Like, if you think back on it, it's like really interesting because you have this team that's working so hard to save the world, and then you have this team that is working so hard to destroy the world, and the two like leaders of that team never meet. And there's the only point where they're really close is when they're leaving the hotel and Corbin goes in the elevator and then Zorg comes out and they're like this short away from seeing each other. That's the only time where they're even like close, and so I think that's really, really cool. Moving on to soundtrack and score. I really like the score to this film. You can just hear in the music how futuristic it sounds. It captures the whole feel of the film just through the music itself. It's really interesting. I love, I'm so passionate about this. But there's sound effects in the film that add so much to the scene, which, for example, like in the beginning, there's a futuristic, the aliens are coming down and there's such like futuristic sounds. Where it just like adds so much to these aliens and their design. And then in the funny scenes, there's like a track that they play I think 3 or 4 times throughout the film, so it's like reoccurring, but every time there's something funny going on, they play the same track, and it's like, it's really funny. But then they also have like different sound effects for things just to add like a little humor to the scene or whatever they're trying to add. And so I think the sound design is very well done for this film. And the music also matches with the action of the film, which I really appreciate as an editor and a filmmaker. I think it's so nice when the music and the action like complement each other. And you cannot talk about The Fifth Element without mentioning the Diva Plava Laguna song. It is so, just that whole scene in the film is just so amazing. Her singing and how it's portrayed and how the fighting matches up with the singing, and the scenes are connected but they're completely separate. It's just so well done, and they do that a lot in this film where they have 2 different scenes that are happening separately, but then they put them together and they mesh them because they're happening at the same time. And I'll put in an example here about what I'm talking about.
This case is empty.
What do you mean, empty?
Empty. The opposite of full. This case is supposed to be full. Anyone care to explain?
The Guardians?
So as you can see, they're completely 2 separate scenes happening in 2 different places, but they're connected and they're seeming to be saying the exact same thing or like talking to each other. So good. I love that about this film. They do that multiple times, not just the time that I showed you, so if you want to see it, you should definitely watch this film. But that's not really part of the soundtrack, that's just something that I forgot to say about story. So sorry. But it kind of comes along with the Diva song as well, because as she's singing it becomes more upbeat, and it's also connected with Leeloo fighting the bad guys over the stones. And it's just so it's just so well done, so well edited, and well made. So I definitely enjoy this movie, as you can tell, whatever. So for the soundtrack slash score, I'm going to give it, I gotta take into account the diva scene, so I'm going to say 8.5 out of 10, because there are such good music moments in the film, and I really just want to take into account how much the music and sound effects mean to the film, so I'm going to say 8.5 out of 10 for that one. Moving on to cinematic elements. So the first thing actually that I noticed when I was rewatching the movie just now is how important the lighting is to this film. Not just used as like a cinematic element that you have to have, it's part of the film and it makes it what it is. So at the beginning they obviously are talking about light.
Light. Aziz, light! Much better, thank you, Aziz.
And then you keep going and you just see so many different lighting and hues, and just harsh lighting and soft lighting and all this different stuff. They really, for each scene, they really curated the different lighting look that they wanted. I know every film does this, but for me, this film is just so much more noticeable, I guess. Like how they use their lighting to convey a feeling in a scene, and also to show like the futuristic elements of the film. Elements, haha, you see what I did there? And then I also want to talk about the special effects in this film. Obviously, it's placed in the future, and it is so well done, especially for a movie made in 1997. They have created a completely different New York City from what it is in our real world. And everybody dresses so different and looks so different, and there are flying cars and flying spaceships, and they use light travel to, or they go across light years to go to different planets and things like that. It's just so, like, there are no moments in the film where you're taken out of the story and you think that about the special effects, you know what I mean? Like, there's some movies where you can just like, you're watching it and then you just see something and it just completely takes you out of the film and you realize like that it was made whatever year, in the 80s or something stupid, you know what I'm talking about? So, but in this movie there's no moments like that. I want to give a shout out to the shot composition in this film. There are two shots in particular that I'm thinking of where the depth is really, really nice. The first one is when Corbin is holding Leeloo and he goes to the priest and the priest is knocked out on the floor, and it's just so, the depth is so well done, and the eye trace is really nice because the priest is laying on the floor in front of him and it just goes straight to Corbin and he's in the middle of the frame, and it's just really well done. And then they do a shot similar to this near the end when he just gets to Floston and he gets his room and his mom calls him and he's sitting there, and they do the same shot where it's backed up and there's really a lot of depth and he's straight in the middle sitting on the bed, and I think it's a nice like match. So I really liked the shot composition of like both of those. Oh, don't you hate when you just get so worked up about movies that you need water because you talk for too long? How relatable. Another obvious cinematic element that I have to talk about is costuming in this movie. Since it is set in the future, there is so much they could have done, and I think they did it really well. So the clothes that everyone wears in this film are so different than anything you would see like day to day, obviously in the real life, which it's just so nice. I love that they just tried to make it as different from how things are right now as possible. And I think the only normal outfit I would say is when Corbin is wearing a tux and he goes to the concert from the Diva. So everything else in this movie is so different and the costuming is just so well done. something that I want to point out about the editing is how well the scenes are cut together. So the transition periods are very short and they go from one scene to the next very quickly, because there's usually a dialogue moment or something that happens before the end of a scene that leads you straight into the next one. So either like someone will say something and then they'll go to the next scene where it seems as if it's a reply to the thing that was said before, if that makes sense. And this goes into what I was talking about before with how the dialogue, or how this film is made, where the scenes are different but they cut into each other, so it's almost like 2 or 3 scenes in one. It's so well done, and it's a technique that I wish was used more in modern film, because so much can be done with it, and it allows for comedic moments and things that you wouldn't have gotten before if a scene were just by itself. So overall, for cinematic elements, I think that this film was really well edited. I think it's put together in such a unique way that's not seen very often, and there's such good special effects. Like, I feel like this movie has such a huge budget. I didn't look it up, but especially for it being made in 1997 and looking at as good as it does, with the color grading and the lighting effects and just the costuming and everything that they had to do to make this film look as good as it does, I'm giving cinematic elements a 9 out of 10 here, because it is so just, I don't know how else to say it besides well made. It's such a fun movie to watch, which is, the story is great, the movie is fun to watch, and there's nothing that takes you away from the story, which is so important. So I give this movie a really high review, but I think it deserves it. It really does. It's so unknown for how good it is, especially, I mean, I say it's unknown, but obviously there are so many people out there who know about this movie. It's just not very many people that I am in an age group with know about this film. And I really hope that if you haven't seen it, I really spoiled it for you, but if you still want to watch it, please go watch it. It is such a good film and it's so worth your time. So that's everything that I have to say about the Fifth Element. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you're enjoying Movie Mondays. I am really enjoying them. It gives me a chance to look at the films that I've seen so many times or haven't seen at all, and just think about how well they're done and on all that stuff. So if you have a film that I should review next time, please comment down below what you think I should do. Like I said, this film was left to me in a comment, and I thought, since I know it so well, that I would give it a shot. So, a shot. That's not what I just can't speak. I've been talking for way too long about this movie, but thank you guys so much for watching again. If you haven't already, please subscribe and leave a like on this video, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!